Right now, it's looking like we're probably in the acceptance phase to the whole grieving process, because everyone knows at this point that The Marvels is a historical flop, not only for the MCU, but for Disney as a whole. And we're already getting a lot of excuses as to why this movie failed, including CEO Bob Iger of Disney completely throwing director Nia DaCosta under the bus for this movie's failure, but I will get more on that in a little bit. After 4 weeks on the big screen, the comic book tentpole is running out of steam with $80 million in North America and $197 million globally. Now, these are pretty sad numbers for an MCU movie. This is something that probably needed to make around $700 to $800 million at a minimum in order for it to break even. And after 4 weeks, it hasn't even broken $300 million. I mean, just look at that domestic total, $80 million after 4 weeks. MCU movies are expected to make around $100 million in just its opening weekend, and this movie hasn't even broken $100 million after 4 weeks, which just goes to show that no one was wanting to see this movie. There would typically be optimism that attendance could rebound over the busy holiday season, but Disney apparently doesn't expect that to be the case because it won't be reporting the film's weekend box office results any longer. On a panel when questioned why this movie was such a huge failure for Disney, CEO Bob Iger had this to say: "The Marvels was shot during COVID. There wasn't as much supervision on set, so to speak, where we have executives that are really looking over what's being done day after day after day." So he's trying to use the COVID excuse, but never mind the fact that other more successful movies were also shot during COVID. We can just disregard that for now. But also really listen to what he's saying here, because essentially he's throwing director Nia DaCosta under the bus by saying that they didn't have the executives at the studio basically holding her hand and walking her through the whole process. Now, this isn't to say that Nia DaCosta is completely void of all responsibility, because she is the director of the project and ultimately the responsibility rests on her shoulders. But I blame in mostly the executives who actually hired her, because in the past, all she really does is have a track record of maybe a couple independent movies done at a low budget. So why do the executives actually think that someone like this could helm a multi-$100 million superhero project, like something completely outside of her wheelhouse? I mean, they shouldn't even have given her a second look, and Nia DaCosta should have had the humility to understand that this is way outside of her area of comfort and she shouldn't take this job because she is not capable of actually working on a project of this scale. And sure enough, she was arrogant enough to think that she can do it, and Disney was dumb enough to think that she's capable of it, and this is ultimately the result. But Bob Iger, the politician basically that he is, he's trying to put his spin on it and say that things are actually not so bad for Disney after all. I'm not sure another studio will achieve some of the numbers that we achieved. I mean, we got to the point where if a film didn't do $1 billion in the global box office, we were disappointed. That's an unbelievably high standard, and I think we have to get more realistic. Oh yes, of course, your standards were just too high. You were just doing so great. You flew too close to the sun. Yeah, they're making a lot of money on their movies, but they're also spending way more than other studios. I mean, this last year alone, the only movie that they had at the box office, and I'm not talking about the MCU, but just for Disney as a whole, the only movie that they had that actually made money for them was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And even then, that was kind of a mediocre success for them because the numbers that it needed, it probably only made around $150 million in total. All the other movies that they released were losing money for them. I mean, this last year alone, they probably lost nearly $1 billion at the global box office, which is just an insane amount. And that's probably why they're also changing course on how they're doing movies in the future. Ultimately, I do think superhero movies have kind of run their course in Hollywood, kind of like how the Westerns did before that. Now, is that to say that there's never going to be a successful superhero movie in the past? No. So is this what people are saying is superhero fatigue? I mean, kinda, yeah, but the whole idea of superhero fatigue that people like to use as an excuse for why the Marvels failed is just that. It's a pretty poor excuse, because if it was a good movie, it still would be successful. The only thing superhero fatigue actually means is people just aren't going to habitually watch bad superhero movies because it's a superhero movie. You still need to make a good movie for people to come out and see it. And we can clearly see from the Marvels that this was a movie that people didn't come out to see.